everyone, welcome back to the journey of my YouTube channel, and welcome to another classics expectations versus reality video, which I haven't done in a little while, and this one is about the Odyssey. Just kidding, it's not about the Odyssey, but I did just make a poll about the Odyssey and whether I should make multiple book study videos about it, or one of these videos about expectations versus reality, or if I should just move on. And you guys voted for a classics expectations versus realities video about it, which is cool because that was kind of what I wanted to do too. So it's nice that you guys confirmed that that's actually what you want to see. So the plan is to make one of those videos. It'll probably show up in May or something. The first reason that I wanted to make sure and talk about this on my channel is that I mentioned this in my video about the 10, which became 15 books that I was most looking forward to reading in 2023. So this one was pretty high on my priority list to read in 2023, and I wanted to let you guys know what I thought of it. Also, I still have it from the library, so I wanted to make this video before I had to take the book back. And then the third reason that I specifically wanted to make this kind of video about it is that of all the classics I've read, this is one of the classics that has defied my expectations the most, and that has just been the most completely different from anything that I was prepared for. So that's exactly the kind of book that I started this series to talk about, but I have really not had one yet that has just made me so much wow, multiple times I was actually thinking, is this the right book? Is this the book that I thought it was? I was checking the author's name to see if this is some different Arthur story. It's no, this is what it is. Okay, that is not what I saw coming. So what did I see coming? Well, I knew it was one of the Arthur legends. This is one of the most well-known retellings of the Arthur story, so I was expecting it to feel kind of authoritative and official, and I've read a couple other Arthur books, so I was expecting kind of a similar tone to them, where it's kind of poetic, kind of sad, very chivalrous, and kind of high British in style and tone. So that's kind of what I thought I was going to be getting, and I knew that this was part 1 of 4 in the Once and Future King series / cycle. Usually now the Once and Future King is usually packaged and sold as a whole, and I knew that this part basically focused on Arthur's childhood, so I was expecting kind of a deep dive into his childhood and into the characters in the story who were prominent in his childhood, and really expecting the whole plot to build up to the moment where he pulls the sword out of the stone, hence the name. I figured this was basically going to be the backstory of the sword in the stone and how Arthur came to pull it out and all that stuff. I had read that it had Merlin in it, and King Pellinore, and Sir Kay, and Sir Ector, and some of these other well-known Arthur characters. So I was okay, we're gonna get quite a bit of character development for them. And I also knew that there was a Disney movie of The Sword in the Stone, so that kind of influenced my expectations for it, just knowing that a Disney movie existed, even though I haven't seen it. But as it turned out, it was more similar to the typical Disney movie in some ways than I expected. And that kind of brings me to the realities of reading this book, because again, it very much feels like a little kid's book. In terms of the tone and the style, it reminded me quite a bit of something like the original Winnie the Pooh books meet the original Peter Pan book. It's kind of that style of storytelling, as very specifically an early 20th century children's book. But that said, and one of the things that surprised me the most about this book is that it's just wildly anachronistic. Almost everything about it defies the timeline in some way. There's first the fact that Merlin in this book lives backwards in time. So while everybody else is moving forward in time, Merlin is moving backwards. So it kind of made me think of Coriakin and the Dawn Treader, who gets younger every day, except Merlin is a way less dignified version of that. Or I guess it's kind of like Tenet, where you have some people going forward in time and some people going backward in time, and Merlin's going backward in time, but it's also a much less serious or dignified version of that. So Merlin has all of these memories and objects and references from things that have happened all the way up through the 1930s when this was written. He talks about all these different events from history, and he's constantly forgetting what time of history he's in and what has happened already and what hasn't happened yet. So he's just all over the place in time, and it's a very interesting world building detail. It's kind of cool in some ways, but it also completely baffled me when first Arthur, who's called Wart for most of this book, he goes into Merlin's cottage and sees baseball cards and that kind of thing. And I was like, what is happening? This doesn't make any sense. And then there's also the fact that this is not set during the time period when the actual King Arthur would have lived, if there actually was a King Arthur. This takes place actually in the 14 to 1500s, which is a mere unimportant 1,000 years after the Saxons invaded Britain. So this is just in a completely different time period, and it kind of broke some believability for me because it displaces a lot of actual history if you act like Uther Pendragon was on the throne in the 14 to 1500s when like the Wars of the Roses were happening and things. It would just have been an extremely different England if that had been the case. So I know that this isn't supposed to be taken terribly literally in that sense. It's not at all supposed to be a historic retelling of King Arthur, which I kind of thought that it was. So just be aware of that going in, that this does not fit within any kind of real historical context. And kind of added on to that then, Arthur also meets Robin Hood and Maid Marian and Little John and the whole band of merry men, and that legend is supposed to take place around the year 1100. So a mere 3 or 400 years out of the timeline for them. So just don't expect these legends to be within any real historical kind of context. It is all very mixed up. It's kind of hodgepodge. There are references to all kinds of things that did not actually exist in the time period that this story was supposed to be happening, and I think I would have enjoyed the book a lot more if I had been ready for that coming in rather than just coming in blind and being like, this is chaos, what is happening? So basically what's actually going on here, and I researched this a tiny bit, I read the Wikipedia page about it and stuff, but the author is not retelling the King Arthur story to provide this like authoritative, definitive compilation of all the Arthur stories. Like I thought that he's retelling the Arthur story in the context of his own time, the 1930s, to create a social commentary about that time period. It talks about things like communism and war and world peace and kind of a lot of things that would have been on the forefront of people's minds in the 1930s. And I know that the Once and Future King was kind of completed and revised in the aftermath of World War II. So there's also a lot of World War II context that goes into that. So you really have to read this not in the historical context of when any of these legends supposedly happened, but in the historical context of when this actual book was written. So in some ways that's really cool, and some people really like it. It also really breaks immersion in the story all the time, for some people at least. Like I found it very distracting, even though I did find it kind of interesting. So just be aware of that going in, that that's what you're getting. And that this is not supposed to be this dignified, chivalrous, official kind of Arthur retelling. It's actually very subversive in a lot of ways. It's very funny at times. It's very hilarious. Like there's one scene where these two knights are jousting, but kind of the whole premise of the scene is, what would it actually look like for two somewhat inexperienced men in full metal suits to actually try to fight each other? And it's absolutely hilarious. It's so funny, and it's playing on all of these tropes and conventions of the Arthur stories. So yeah, the book is hilarious, but it's actually kind of a subversion of a lot of the Arthur tropes, a commentary on the Arthur story itself. So yeah, just be aware of that going in. Another big thing that I was not expecting is that the plot is extremely episodic. The Sword and the Stone shows up in like the last 2 or 3 chapters, I think, is very much just the last episode on the end that kind of caps things off. And most of the story is about Merlin turning Arthur into all different kinds of animals so that he can learn from each different kind of animal the lessons that he needs so that he can be a king one day. And it's kind of cool. A lot of these little episodes are very wise and very beautiful. There are a lot of killer quotes in this thing. I kind of wish that I had taken the time to write some quotes down, or take pictures of them or something, because there are some really strong and cool quotes in some of these episodes, but they are just very choppy. Usually each chapter is very much its own thing. Maybe 2 or 3 chapters will kind of be grouped together, but there kind of is no plot. There is very little overarching goal, very little overarching stakes. It's very much just like a series of little kids' stories. And then the animals all do come back into it in a really cool way at the end with the Sword in the Stone. The climax is really pretty satisfying, I think, surprisingly so, since there was very little overarching plot. But just be aware that some of these episodes are kind of bizarre and kind of trippy, especially if you don't take into account the context that the author is writing from. And I felt like they took some time away from some of the things that I would rather have seen. Like I would rather have gotten more character development for characters like Kay and Sir Ector and even Arthur himself. We got told a lot about their character development, but we didn't get shown that much about their character development. And I kept being like, I mean, this was interesting. You know, Arthur gets turned into a fish. That's kind of interesting. But I kept feeling like I would rather have seen some more of the character development, some more conventional Arthur stuff was kind of what I was looking for. But if you're aware going in that it is a bunch of episodes about Arthur getting turned into animals and learning life lessons, then you will be set up to enjoy this more. But to end on, one positive thing that I did not see coming is that this version of Arthur is probably the most likable version of this character that I have ever seen. Like, he is just a really, really good kid. He feels realistic as a kid, but he also feels very mature and understanding for a kid. Like, Kay can be kind of a difficult adopted brother to get along with. He can be kind of jealous and selfish and shallow at times, but Arthur just really has this understanding of where Kay is coming from and why he is like he is, and he's just really, really kind to Kay all the time, and I appreciate that a lot. He's very willing to learn. He's very eager to have all these experiences with Merlin. He enjoys the things that he's experiencing, and he's like, well, I need to learn this because this is part of my education. And so he's always very eager to go on those adventures and to receive those lessons and to actually use those lessons in his life. So I ended up actually really liking this version of Arthur a lot based on things that I read about the rest of the Once and Future King. Unfortunately, it sounds like later in the books he becomes a very minor background character and that he doesn't continue to be quite as awesome as he is in this book. So that's a little bit sad. But in this book we do get a really, really good young Arthur as a character. So yeah, those are my thoughts on The Sword in the Stone. It's strange. It's very interesting. I want to know what you guys think of this if you've read it, and I also want to know what you think of The Once and Future King as a whole if you've read it, because I'm still kind of undecided about whether I want to read the rest of it or not, so please give me all your input on that, and let me know if you have a favorite retelling of the Arthur story or just a favorite retelling of some kind of old myth or legend. Let me know what you like and what you like about it, and maybe I will check it out because I definitely find that kind of thing very interesting. So stick around for my classics, expectations versus realities video about the Odyssey. It is coming. Until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks for journeying with me. Bye.